Want to learn about public policy with a group of curious fellow learners? Apply for the 12-week graduate certificate in public policy. Early bird deadline closes 27th July.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hi, I'm Sarthak and I welcome you to All Things Policy. The 74th Constitutional Amendment Act, enacted in 1992, gave constitutional status to urban local bodies. In a way, it institutionalized urban democracy in India. The amendment envisaged that cities will be autonomous, they will be able to carry out various functions, they will have enough resources to carry out these functions, and also people living in the cities can hold their governments accountable. It has been more than 30 years since the amendment came into being. But what is the situation now? Has the goal of functional devolution, fiscal empowerment, autonomy been met? In this discussion, we will touch upon these points. Joining me for this episode is Miss V.R. Vachana. Vachana heads Municipal Law and Policy at Janaagraha. We are going to discuss the findings in a recently released compendium of performance audits on the implementation of the 74th Constitutional Amendment Act. These performance audits were undertaken by the respective principal accountant general offices in various states. Vachana and her team at Janaagraha helped design the evaluation metrics and also in the synthesis of the compendium. Would highly recommend you to go through it. The link is shared in the description. This is also a very unique initiative since the CAG involved civil society organizations and has also made the information more accessible in this form. Hi Vachana, welcome to All Things Policy.
Hi Sarthak, thank you.
So before we discuss the performance of the urban local self-governments, I just wanted to look at the background or maybe understand what was the motivation behind the audit. Could you give a quick background about what mandate you had? What was the process that you followed?
Yeah, sure. So the rationale behind the performance audit was essentially because 32 years have passed since at that point, 30 years have passed since the enactment of the 74th Constitutional Amendment Act, and India is urbanizing. Therefore, the role of urban local self-governments are also going to be more important and significant. And therefore, the Comptroller and Auditor General of India essentially felt that there is a need to evaluate whether state governments have established robust urban governance systems, because local government is also a state subject, right? So in accordance with the provisions of 74th Constitutional Amendment Act. So this conversation began around 2019. So December 2019, we actually had an MOU with the CAG of India. And one of the mandates was also to provide technical knowledge and project management support to undertake the performance audit on the implementation of 74th Amendment. So we had the opportunity to collaborate with the CAG office on designing the audit metrics. And there was a significant leadership that was taken by the PAG of Karnataka then, which was Ms. Nivedita. So she and her team led the first pilot of this audit, which was in Karnataka. And we had the opportunity to actually collaborate with her team as well. And this performance audit report was tabled in the legislature by September 2020. So then by 2024 March, this report was scaled to another 17 states, the performance audit, and it was tabled in their respective state legislatures. And then the CAG of India wanted us to basically prepare a compendium drawing the trends and patterns from these 18 states. And the compendium was essentially released by the CAG of India on November 2024.
Fantastic. So you have right now 18 separate reports, and also the compendium is basically a compilation of the most significant statistics from each of these things.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So in fact, let's go into what have been some of the findings over there. So when it comes to functions, the 74th Constitutional Amendment envisages that the urban local self-governments, they should be performing somewhere around 18 functions. And again, I just want to highlight some of these things, right? when it comes to regulation of land use or regulation of construction of buildings, urban planning, planning for socio-economic development, urban poverty alleviation, fire services, water supply, public health sanitation, all these things are functions that the urban local self-governments are supposed to perform.
Right.
But in reality, how much of that is happening right now? What does the performance audit tell us? And also, I want to highlight that many times what I see around me, right, when you have elections for the state legislative assemblies, or when you have elections for the parliament, the candidates over there, they come and promise many of these things which seem typically to be under the jurisdiction of the urban local self government. So I just want to know, how have the urban local self governments performed?
Yeah, no, that's a very, very important point that you just brought, Sarthak. There is, a lot of times the local government functions are what are being used in the election campaigns of parliament and to the parliament and the state assemblies, right? And which in some ways perhaps also is a function of how weak our urban local governments are, because if you actually analyze the voting pattern, the election turnout, the voting pattern in these three elections, which is the parliament, state assemblies, and urban local government, the average voter turnout is actually much lesser in municipal elections, which probably is also because as citizens, we do not take urban local government seriously, which essentially is also driven by the fact that our urban local governments are not adequately empowered over functions, funds, and functionaries, right? So now coming to your question with regards to functional devolution, the effective devolution, which is the functions actually being undertaken by the urban local governments on ground, are just 4. And these functions are typically, vital statistics, or managing slaughterhouses or tanneries, or handling burial grounds. So the core functions like urban planning, regulation of land use, water supply, public health, all of these are handled either by civic agencies or state departments. The problem here is these parastatals will have their own, governing bodies, which would often not have the elected representatives of the urban local governments, and which means they are not also reporting, they're not accountable to the urban local governments, while these are local services which have a direct impact on the citizens of that city. However, they're not accountable to the mayor or the city council, which means there is a significant issue with regards to how these civic agencies are accountable to the citizens, right? So the 2 states where the maximum numbers have been devolved to urban local governments in practice are basically Haryana with 10 functions and Madhya Pradesh with 9 functions. But the problem is, even with these limited powers over functions, the compendium would also show that there are no sufficient, the finances and the powers over people are also inadequate, that the urban local governments are not placed to deliver even on these limited responsibilities.
Okay, so there are 3 interesting points. One is, many of these functions are being carried out by parastatals, right? And these parastatals are typically under the state government, which
Yes.
implies that state government has not yet devolved these functions to the urban local self governments. They are carrying it out. So, which is again not following the 74th constitutional amendment in letter and spirit. The second thing that you mentioned, that some states have performed well, and you gave the example of Haryana, Madhya Pradesh, and even in those states, it is 9 functions. That means even the best performing states, 50% of the functions are not being devolved, and the other states, as you mentioned, the things which are like very, which might not be very, very significant, maybe managing statistics or regulation of slaughterhouses. If I compare it with, let's say, public health sanitation, I would probably rate it lower when it comes to significance. Those things are being given. So urban local self-governments are not necessarily performing the most vital activity, so as to say. And yeah, third point, even if they have some functions, they don't have the required capacity to perform these things because they're limited by lack of finances. In fact, I will be going to the finances thing in a bit. In your report, I also found out that you have mentioned that certain states have actually divided these functions into different categories: obligatory, discretionary. So somewhere, it clearly shows that they're not giving importance to certain functions, or they don't have trust that maybe the local bodies will not be able to perform it.
Yes, that's right. So about 7 states, like you said, by law, basically have segregated these 18 functions of 12 schedule as obligatory and discretionary. So obligatory, as it would denote, would mean it would be more mandatory in nature, whereas discretionary would be like it's more optional for the urban local governments to take care of it. So even so, if we look at the mandate by law. So on average, 17 out of 18 functions are what has been devolved to urban local governments by law. Now, 9 states have devolved it by 100%, but in these 9 states, about 6 states of these 9 states essentially have made the segregation of obligatory and discretionary, like Karnataka. Karnataka hasn't devolved all, actually. Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, Maharashtra, Manipur, and Odisha. And typically, the common functions that we noticed were basically urban forestry and protection of the environment, slum improvement and upgradation, urban poverty alleviation. So yes, I mean it could one way one could also say that it's perhaps because of limited capacities. Therefore, the primary responsibility should be with the obligatory functions. And if such capacities prevail, then the urban local governments can take up the discretionary functions. However, the whole agenda should have been actually to strengthen the hands of urban local governments to be able to deliver all of these, local functions, and ideally should not have just been limited to those 18 functions too, right? Like, and we have such example, like for example, Mumbai actually also takes care of transport as well as power, which both of these functions are not part of the 12th schedule. Yeah.
Just like you mentioned, there are some functions which are typically devolved. Are there some functions which are generally not devolved?
Fire services and urban planning are typically not devolved.
Okay, is there any reason for that, or?
I'm not sure. I think in case of fire services, typically there has always been a state department which has been handling. Urban planning has been handled by the Development Authority or DTPC. Perhaps it is also a reflection of the lack of trust in some ways to undertake this functions. So I think, unfortunately, quite often what we hear from the ecosystem is that because of weak capacities, there is a hesitation to devolve more. However, the solution to strengthening urban local governments to actually further the devolution, unfortunately, on all respects, right? Unfortunately, that's not happening.
Yeah, and you were mentioning about the function when you mentioned about parastatals, right? You were mentioning that they are performing different functions, and as a result of which these functions are not necessarily coming under the ambit of the urban local self-government,
Okay.
right? So, what are some of these institutional mechanisms to carry out these functions? See, one is, again, you have the urban local self-government which can carry it out, but that's not happening, and parastatals are doing it. So, what are some of the institutional issues right now?
Yeah, so I would not say that the existence of a civic agency or a parastatal in itself is a problem, because ideally these are supposed to be specialized agencies which have the expertise to deliver these functions. And if we look at the global scale as well, these such agencies exist, right? We look at an NYC or a London or a Joburg, there are specialized agencies that deliver these functions. However, the defining part is that they all are accountable to the urban local government. They report to the mayor and the city council. They can hold these agencies responsible, right? So today, but in India, cities, what happens is it's so fragmented that even unfortunately, since the recent past, urban flooding is a very repeating occurrence. But the urban local government cannot hold itself accountable because several, even if you take this the function of stormwater drains, for example, the stormwater drain is owned by the say the urban local government. The water that runs through it probably is with the water supply board. It goes to the lake. The lake might have some part of it. Some of the lakes would be under the control of the urban local government, some with the state government.
State governments.
In Bangalore, like for example, there is another body called the Lake Development Authority. So there is significant fragmentation happening because of this lack of accountability, or having a single accountable body for the city, even with regards to a small piece of function. So, so you can just imagine the complexity and extent of fragmentation that is actually existing as it is. So the fundamental problem of not having adequate powers, and therefore it's also affecting common citizens, is simply because the urban local government is not the single accountable political authority in the city. Right? The mayor has no powers. The mayor's tenure is lesser than the term of the council. So yeah, we see from globally well-run cities that that's not the case.
Yeah, so since you mentioned about mayors, you also found out that very few states you have directly elected mayors, and also there are states in which the mayors and the term of the council, I mean, it's not coterminous basically. So, what were some of the top findings over there?
So the performance audit just looked at the tenure. It did not look exactly as to how less tenure is impacting the functioning in some ways. But I think performance audit of Karnataka report, actually, the Karnataka basically showed that how having a tenure that is not coterminous with that of the council is basically not giving the opportunity to the mayor to even see the announcements of projects that the mayor made to completion, because it ends in 1 year to 2.5 years, right? So the tenure becomes a very critical aspect. I would say mode of election, which I think in India, as per the company, there are 5 states with directly elected mayor. Considering India's current political situation, it's okay maybe if there is no directly elected mayor, but tenure becomes really important. The powers over funds, functions, functionaries becomes really important. But we should aspire to reach a point where India can actually have directly elected mayors with 5-year tenure with powers over these 3, because direct election alone is not good enough.
Not the solution, yeah.
Yeah, even if you look at the 5 states which have directly elected mayor, it's not like they're performing really well. That's because they do not have powers over funds, functions, functioning. So that's very important.
Yeah. So since you mentioned about funds, I want to segue to that bit. So again, what have been your findings? What have been the audit's findings with respect to the finance raising capacities of the urban local self governments, and also the expenditure responsibilities of urban local self governments?
Yeah, right. Unfortunately, it's a little bleak picture. So the urban local governments do not generate adequate revenue. So they're able to generate only 32% of the total revenue as their own sources of revenue, which means they are extremely dependent on the state and central government grants. So the analysis basically showed that on average, 56% of their total revenue is basically grants. Right. So, we have also seen the RBI reports on municipal finances, which essentially says that the urban local governments in India are weakest globally. And over years, there is a pattern of declining own revenues and rising dependence on grants, which is quite concerning, in fact. Right. So now, I said that the urban local governments are dependent on both central and state grants, which means it is extremely important to have predictability of fiscal transfers as well, right? But if we look at, say, for example, Constitution of State Finance Commission, which is a mandate by the 74th Constitutional Amendment Act, every 5 years, which only 10 states have done. And there is an average delay of 412 days in setting up SFCs by the states, right? So now, because there is a delay in the Constitution of State Finance Commissions, it often results in short receipt of grants to urban local governments. So about on average from SFCs, that short release is about 1,600 odd crores, right? And so one reason is the delay in the constitution of SFCs itself. Second is not adhering with the recommendations given by the SFCs. So only Uttarakhand and Kerala actually have, and Punjab have adhered with the recommendations of the SFCs 100%, right? And again, as a reflection of the capacities issue, whether it's union of grants or SFC state grants, there are performance grant criteria, which quite often urban local governments are not able to meet. So that's also another reason why there is a short release of or receipt of grants to urban local governments, right? So that's one. Second reason for poor finances is the weak fiscal decentralization itself, because the access to taxes and user charges are limited. And even when there are cases where they have powers over taxes, for example, property tax, if we take, the decisions on the rate of property tax, the frequency of revision, the band within which they can, fix the tax rate, etc., are all decided by the state government. It's not typically with the urban local government. But now, say even with while the fiscal decentralization itself is weak, the urban local governments are also not in a position to optimize the revenue that they have access to. So if you take property tax, they are able to realize on average only 56% of the demand for property tax, right? And then there is this added issue of what I was saying before, because the urban local governments cannot take call on uh, revising the property tax. It's often quite delayed. Like, for example, in Tamil Nadu, urban local government's last revision of property tax rate was in 2013. So this has actually resulted on average about 2,500 odd crores of revenue loss for urban local governments in Tamil Nadu. So it's not just with tax. So even if it user charges, Madhya Pradesh, for example, is able to only recover 21 to 32% of expenses that they're incurring on operation and maintenance of water supply. Rajasthan is able to recover only 77% of the expenses that they're incurring on solid waste management services, for example, right? So now even if the urban local governments have to tap into alternative sources of financing, it's important to have strong financial management and accountability system. Unfortunately, that is also weak. So the compendium, I would show that there is unrealistic budgeting. It's like there's a maximum budget variance of about 403%. I mean, that high, 403% in terms of receipts and 274% in terms of expenditure, right? So, which means with the fiscal management and accountability systems also being weak, which means the credibility of urban local governments therefore comes down. And we have other studies which actually shows that even elements of disclosure of financial and operational information are also weak, which means that the ability of the urban local government to tap into, say, market-based financing, which it just becomes really difficult. So therefore, all of this contributes to a weak financial capacity, which in turn results to a very high resource expenditure gap as well. So the compendium shows that it's on average about 40% of these 18 states that have been assessed.
Yeah, thanks for summarizing it. A few observations from that. So one is, you mentioned that around 1/3 of the total revenue is own source revenue, which implies for almost 2/3 of the revenue are dependent on the union and the states, which also implies that you are extremely vulnerable. Let's say the state government changes or the union government changes, their priorities change, then it is going to impact your governance. Secondly, if again a large part of it is in the form of grants, and again these grants might be tied grants, right? So the state government has certain priority, and accordingly it will push for that, and it need not necessarily be the priority of the urban local self government. The people there, or maybe they want something else, but the state has something else in mind. So this again will lead to a situation where again this top down approach is ensuring that people are getting some services which they don't need, and they need something they're not getting. So those kind of challenges I think might emerge. Now when it comes to some of the points that you mentioned, right, that they find it very difficult to realize different kinds of revenues, and also when it comes to budgets, there is a massive variance, some 400%, 274%. It also shows that these bodies right now don't have the adequate capacity maybe for budgeting and all those things, right? So it requires some sort of specialized skills which they are lacking. And it is interesting that at union level, at state level also, you'll find variance, but I don't think the variance will be this huge. So if they have been able to rectify some of these things, maybe at the local government levels some sort of knowledge transfer can help.
I think therefore fiscal responsibility and budget management is extremely important. So, I mean, we have examples also. Like, for example, Karnataka, I mean, it's one of the pioneers, in fact, to have such rules, which actually it has a very detailed rules called Karnataka Municipal Budgeting and Responsibilities, KMEBR, which has been adapted, I think, in Jammu and Kashmir. And I mean, BBMP, the erstwhile BBMP, also actually in, I think, 2022 or so, came up with the BBMP fiscal responsibility budget management rules, which very clearly states, on the mandates with regards to audits, on disclosures of financial operational information, mandates on a medium-term fiscal plan, which is essentially a 3 to 5 year plan, which is, and the annual budget should be tied to such medium-term fiscal plans. The problem often is that, I mean, the rules are really good and robust, but it's often not also translating on ground, right? It's not like the urban local governments across Karnataka, say, for example, are putting out, are preparing, for example, a medium-term fiscal plan or publishing it in a systematic way. So that's also a challenge. However, we have such examples which I know other states can also bring such rules to ensure that the financial management accountability systems are robust in our urban local governments.
Yeah. There is one contradiction also I noticed when I was going through the report. So one aspect is, yes, you do not have enough resources. But again, whatever resources you have, I think a part of it is also not utilized. There is some, the utilization of funds is in some cases is as low as 61%.
Right,
So
right.
you don't have money, but you are also not utilizing the money. So how do we explain that?
I think it's also a function of capacities, the institutional capacity as well, that the urban local governments are not able to tap into the funds that are actually available to them, right? So that also ties to the availability of human resources and the skill sets that they have in ensuring that the funds are utilized well. So I think these are all connected
Issues. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, since we're talking about human resources, it is a nice way to segue into that. So if you look at different literature on state capacity, and it reminds me of one of the graph from Devesh Kapoor's literature. So this graph shows that if you compare the different levels of government, India's state government, union government, local government, with that of China or with that of US, one of the stark differences, in case of India, the local governments have very low capacity, and when it comes to US or China, the local governments have very good state capacity. They're staffed well, they are managed well. So again, you have also done some of this, and as part of your audit you have also looked at some of these things, right? So when it comes to the urban local self-governments, to what extent or how effectively they have been able to mobilize, incentivize human resources? As we have already been talking about, some areas capacity is lacking, but yeah, if you could elaborate on the basis of some numbers, it will be helpful.
Yeah, sure. So actually, human resources is the fundamental challenge for urban local governments. And I would say it's not just applicable to urban local governments, but across tiers of government, right? Even say in judiciary and say police, we do not have adequate people. It's often the mainstream thinking is that government is overstuffed, but that's not the reality. It's just that it's perhaps in a more pronounced way, we can see in urban local governments, right? So, couple of issues. One, significantly, importantly, just like we discussed in case of finances, is that the lack of power for urban local governments over their staff. So, for example, they are not able to, they are not empowered to assess their workforce requirements. It's basically dictated by the state government. So there's a very interesting example that the compendium says where Shimla Municipal Corporation actually requested the state government to create 720 additional posts, whereas the state government only granted 20 additional posts. Right, so it does not probably reflect the requirement that the
stark mismatch. Yeah.
Yes, right. And additionally, so it's very important for the urban local government to have powers over, say, recruitment or initiating disciplinary action or promotions, for it to be able to hold the staff accountable as well, particularly the mayor, city council. And that's how, if we look at well-run cities globally, that's how the cities work, right? But here, unfortunately, urban local governments are not empowered over any matters of staffing, which is limited powers we would see in case of some states, not significant or good enough. So so there is limited powers. Second is that in some ways connected to that is also the inadequacy of staff, which we sort of mentioned as we began this conversation, right? So on average, 37% is the vacancies against a sanctioned post, and this gets worse in smaller ULBs. Like it's 7% in, say, 7% higher in, say, municipal councils or nagar panchayats, for example. So the crisis of staffing is actually more. It's not good in any categories of urban local governments, but it's um, much more worse in case of smaller urban local governments. Now, these calculations that we are doing in terms of vacancies is actually again sanction post, which in itself might not be scientifically estimated, and that's a bigger problem, right? So the Karnataka performance audit report, if you look at, you will see that the observation that the population of the urban local government was the only criteria that was used to arrive at the sanction strength. So, which means we are not factoring in other aspects like, say, what's the geographical area that is covered, or what is the extent and type of population, right? The number of properties perhaps within that area. These are not considered. So, an interesting observation that Karnataka's performance audit does is when they actually checked for the number of employees per thousand population, it remained as same as what I mean. This was done against census 2011. They checked that number of employees per thousand population was as same as census 2001.
Okay.
Right, and I don't have to say then the extent of difficulty those urban
So in
local
20 years,
governments.
nothing's
Yes,
changed.
yeah. So the adequacy in itself, we might not be actually estimating it even rightly, right? So there has to be a more scientific way of estimating what exactly is the urban local government's current requirement. We may also have to probably look at the new departments or specializations that are required as well. Like, for example, a lot of environment related services are undertaken by staff under health wing, for example. But it might not. It might
Yeah,
not be.
yeah, exactly. So I don't understand why
Yeah.
environment and health. Yeah, I mean, environment does impact health, but
Yes.
the skills required might be different. So again, this is about recruitment, right? But at the same time, let's say someone is underperforming. Can they be maybe can there be a disciplinary action against them, or they can be fired for underperforming? Can the
Yeah.
urban local government do that?
No, the urban local government cannot. I think it's some there is some which is not probably covered in the compendium, but as part of the other work that I've done, certain states do give powers to urban local governments to recommend to the state government to take disciplinary
Necessary
action.
action.
Yes, but it is recommendatory nature, and it will require the approval of the state government. But that's some limited power that the urban local government would have. But
And
otherwise, there is no performance management system that exists in any urban local government in this country. Interestingly, the earlier the BBMP Act actually now it has changed obviously to the Greater Bengaluru Governance Act, but BBMP Act did have a provision on performance management. Establishing performance management system in BBMP, which is Brihad Bengaluru Mahanagara Palike. And now, in fact, that provision has been retained even in the Greater Bengaluru Governance Act. But other than that, we do not have any case where this has been even mandated by law, right?
okay.
So,
And since we are mentioning about the specialized skills that might be required to carry out some of these functions, and some of these skills have become more important in the last 20 years, right? Maybe
right.
environment was not that big a factor 20 years back. So, are there enough institutions to train the officials, administrators? I'm asking this question because when it comes to the different kinds of public servants at union level or the state level, you have certain kinds of academies, institutions, which help the concerned officials get these kind of training, right? Get these kind of skills. Does it happen at the urban local self government level?
Yeah, I think it needs to be strengthened, and I completely agree with you that it's extremely important to have systematic training of the workforce and ULGs. But like the compendium shows that only 7 states have actually training institutes for municipal
Dedicated to
functionaries.
this?
Yeah, right. But the problem is it's not systematic. It's often ad hoc in nature, and it's not also based on an assessment of the needs and requirements of the officials, and there is no impact evaluation or an assessment of the post training as well. So it's I mean there's a lot more to be done in terms of enhancing the capacity of staff, and more so, especially with the requirement of specialization that's required now with the urban challenges that we are facing. It's extremely important. Yeah.
So again, we have been talking about the issues till now, but I'm pretty sure you would have also came across some interesting case studies where maybe things are actually happening better than other places, right? I could see that in the compendium there were some case studies, right? There you have highlighted it in boxes. They were there.
Mhm.
So would you like to highlight some of these interesting cases that possibly other states, other urban local bodies can emulate?
Yeah. So if you look at, say, for example, if I can start talking with the power, say, for mayor and the council, there is this unique system of mayor and councils in Kolkata, the ULGs of Chhattisgarh, Madhya Pradesh, and Tripura, which is essentially like a cabinet system. So relatively, I mean, when if we compare it with the bureaucratic-led system, in comparison, this is a more advanced system where the mayor and council are relatively more empowered. The mayor heads the mayor and council, and there are councillors who are members of, typically about 8 to 10 of them would be members of the mayor and council, and each of those councillor is also in charge of specific departments, right? So they have better financial and sanctioning power. So that's an interesting system that exists. Now, if you look at the mayors in Kerala, they have, say, powers to suspend officers, except the secretary or those in the gazetted rank, once it's ratified by the city council. So that is one aspect. The other best practice that has been shown is the ward committee meetings in Bangalore. And very interestingly, these ward committee meetings have been happening without having an active council. So a very sad reality in case of India's local governance is absence of active councils. About 60% of the urban local governments in the country did not have an active council during the time of these audits. So, but despite that, and ward committees are mandated when the council is active. So, despite the absence of an active council, Bangalore actually has been running ward committees, and also because the then rules mandated that the first Saturday of every month at 10 a.m. the ward committee meeting should happen. And not just the urban local governments, but also parastatal representatives can be called into the meeting, and the citizens can actually raise their concerns directly as well. It can have its flaws, but still something which, because ward committees are not functional otherwise in most urban local governments, right? Another which I think I already mentioned is the powers Mumbai has over, say, transport, power, etc. Right? When it comes to, say, staffing, municipal cadres, the comprehensive reforms over staffing actually happened in Madhya Pradesh. They have actually a comprehensive capacity building policy for urban. They basically introduced municipal cadre rules across various specializations like finance, administration, environment, etc. So that's something interesting. Odisha has also done something similar. Then in terms of finances, like I said, the KMABR rules or the Bangalore's provisions, that's even there in the new GBG Act as well, are also examples which definitely other states or ULGs can emulate. And the thing is that even if there are no such mandates, some of these can even be initiated by the urban local governments itself. So, yeah.
Yeah. So, Vachana, one thing, the success stories, again, that you mentioned, again, what could be the reason why this specific model is there in these urban local self governments? Is it because, again, I don't know whether you have the answer, maybe just for the sake of discussion. Is it because of some historical factor, or is it because the states, again, maybe prioritize that? Or was it people who demanded these things?
Yeah, no, it's a very important question too. The political will actually has a very important role to play, especially in terms of empowering urban local governments, right? Local governments in general. So Kerala definitely stands out in that respect because of the political will that was existing, and which therefore also means, for example, with the People's Plan in 1996 in Kerala, and the funds that have been specifically allocated to local governments, etc., were the initiatives that the Communist Party government took. But because the political will was pretty strong, it did not change the provisions or the powers that were granted to the local governments did not change with the change in government, right? So that the political will is the crux of ensuring local governments are empowered with adequate funds function. So that's what you see in some cases. In case of Mumbai, there is obviously historical reasons. So they've been historically handling transport, power, etc. And Mumbai actually, therefore, also, despite the mayor having, only 2.5 years tenure, the council actually holds significant powers, which is due to historical reason. It's been an old city government.
Okay. So yeah, thanks for this. Now, again, if I just reflect on whatever we discussed, right? The urban local self-governments don't have enough functions. Constitution mandates that they should have it, but again, the states don't necessarily transfer these functions to them. When it comes to finances, right? Fiscal empowerment was one of the goal of the 74th Constitutional Amendment Act. But again, most of the urban local self-governments don't have enough finances with them. Their own revenue is quite low, right? 1/3 of the total revenue is generated by them. And again, when it comes to their ability to deliver, the capacity, the HR, and all those issues, they face massive challenges. Now, what it feels like is the states have not devolved the functions, finances to them. Somewhere it feels like the blame lies at the state level. However, typically when we talk about the different ways by which it can be solved is maybe have a very active state election commissions, or maybe ensure that the state finance commissions, they work properly, they table their report properly, their recommendation is taken into consideration. But given that it has not happened, states have typically not prioritized this thing. These kind of solutions, right? How will it work, right? What it will take to change the incentives for the states?
It is. I don't know that I can actually answer that question.
Again.
But I think what we are not realizing and recognizing here is that if we look at global scale, we cannot see a single country which has progressed without strengthening its local governments. It can be a democratic country, it can be a non-democratic country, but that's the pattern that we can see. So state governments therefore need to recognize the significant role local governments can play in addressing the challenges and opportunities that our cities are facing today. And so a lot of challenges are playing out in our cities, therefore the opportunities will also have to emerge from the cities, and that can be best responded to by the urban local governments, right? So that recognition is really important. So I mean,
in fact, I just want to add to this. You mentioned local governments, right? In fact, it will be urban local governments, because it is typically the cities that generate revenue, right? Yes. If the state governments have the recognition of the fact that if the cities prosper, the amount of revenue that they can generate increases, which in turn will not only help the cities, it will also help the adjacent areas, maybe the rural areas, because again, rural areas, if they require more support, again, where does the finance come from? It will come from the revenue that the cities generate. So maybe this recognition is something that is very important.
Yes, but I think this can also play otherwise, because cities also generate revenue, which sometimes is the significant source for any state government. And therefore, the tendency for the state government to control cities, especially large cities.
Okay, right? Okay. So they want it to be within their own.
Yes. So there is hesitation to devolve further. So interestingly, if you look at even say mayoral tenure and mayoral powers, it's actually much more worse in metro cities. So if you take Bangalore, Delhi, Mumbai, all of these cities actually have mayoral tenure less than 5 years, for example.
Okay.
Right. So that's an interesting pattern, but I think it can play both ways. But in any case, even say the states do not take active measures towards democratic decentralization, they should still invest in strengthening the capacities of urban local governments. So that still can happen.
And also I think there's a role of union government, because I think it was Raja Chelle or someone who mentioned that everyone wants decentralization only to its own level, right?
Right.
So again, states, the point that you mentioned, states would like to have greater control over the cities because that is where the money is coming from. But yeah, one of the reason why states want to have these kind of control is they themselves are not having enough resources. If you look at the expenditure patterns, it is the states which spend a lot of money as compared to the union, while when it comes to revenue, it is the union which gets a larger share of the revenue. So decentralization from union to the states can possibly help in this aspect.
Yes. Yeah, that's
One last bit. So again, you have done this very fascinating, interesting audit of these many functions. Anything that you excluded in the first in this particular round from the scope of the audit? Anything that you would like to cover in the future?
Yeah, I mean, I think, this compendium that we had the opportunity to work with the CAG of India, I think that's sort of holding the mirror to the state, right? And we know what is broken. Now, I think the idea is basically to get to action, right? So the state governments need to act on what this mirror is essentially revealing. And for which I think the Public Accounts Committee can play a very important role as a legislative scrutiny, a system that's enabled in our country. And all of these performance audit reports are tabled in the state legislatures. They are supposed to be discussed and scrutinized by the Public Accounts Committees. And they also can summon the state governments or its various departments to understand why such compliances haven't happened and recommend follow-up actions, right? So also that's a body that can be actually leveraged to bring in some change. And also as civil society organizations, we should be able to, or civil society representatives, we should be able to tap into that system that we have at our in our hand, right? So that's important. So like I was saying earlier, it's really important to recognize that we cannot do away with strong local governments, be it urban or rural, and therefore, and now the compendium and all of these performance audit reports of these 18 states, and actually it's actually, as we speak, is also happening in other states as well. So hopefully we have another volume, perhaps in the future. But it actually very clearly defines what the problem is. And now, we should not have any delay in the state governments in particular. The lever for this urban transformation is essentially with the state government. So they should take the leadership in fixing the issues that these performance audits and the compendium report has shown. It has also shown some best practices, like you were mentioning, which means states can also learn from some of these best practices. Yeah.
So I'm really happy that some states have taken these kind of lead to understand where we are right now. I'm really happy that folks like you have worked on something like this, and we have a very good data set. Usually when it comes to data related to municipal governments, we don't have that much data, or at least it is not there, not in one place. So I really appreciate that some of you are doing it. And to the listeners, again, Vachana has already mentioned that civil society organizations are taking it up. It's a good thing. But again, to the listeners, it will be great if you could also look at the urban local self-government's performance in your vicinity and maybe take it to the right authority. This is how our cities can become better. And if our cities do better, our economy will do better. Vachana, do you want to add anything to it?
No, I think you've covered it all, Sarthak.
Yeah, thanks Vachana for joining us, and thanks Vachana for and your team for putting up such a great report, and thanks to the listeners for tuning in.
Thank you so much.
If you liked our show, dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy and economic affairs. Check us out at our Twitter handle @Takshashila INST or our website takshashila.org.in.